The subcommittee will come to order. The chair recognizes himself for an opening statement. Today we are going to have a markup on H.R. 1938, the North American Made Energy Security Act, and hopefully give a green light to a project that is long overdue. We're trying to pass this legislation because, in our view, on this side of the aisle, EPA has really been dragging its feet on this important project to build a pipeline through the middle of the United States. Canada is increasing its production of oil, especially from its oil sands in Alberta. And the current pipeline system that sends Canadian oil south to American refineries is struggling to handle the growing volumes. The Keystone project would allow up to 1.29 million barrels of oil per day to flow into refineries in the Midwest and Gulf Coast, a 700,000 barrel per day increase over existing capacity. More oil over a period of time means more supply, obviously, which translates into lower prices. And this project would also provide up to 20,000 new construction jobs. So we have a project here that would help increase the supply of oil in America, make us less dependent on foreign oil, create additional jobs, and with an uptick in unemployment around the country, it seems to me this is precisely what we need to be doing. Now, how do we find ourselves here today? Well, TransCanada, the developer of this project, first submitted its application for a presidential permit in September of 2008. The State Department did not release its draft environmental impact statement until April 2010. And after that first step, EPA rejected the draft statement and told State Department that they had additional work to do. After another year, the State Department issued a supplemental draft statement that addressed EPA's concerns. Even then, EPA asked that additional material be provided. So 1938 is a bipartisan bill that cuts through the endless delays that seem to be becoming commonplace at EPA. And this bill is very simple. It creates a hard deadline for the administration to make a decision on the Keystone pipeline. And in this bill, we set November the 1st, 2011 as the date by which a decision must be made. So I think it is time to move this important legislation to, as I said, make us less dependent upon foreign oil, provide additional supply in the U.S., and create up to 20,000 jobs for the American people. So at this time, I'd like to recognize the ranking member for the purpose of an opening statement. Mr. Rush is recognized for 5 minutes.
I want to thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Chairman, today we are marking up the North American Made Energy Security Act, which would short-circuit the permitting process and require the Secretary of Energy to coordinate all of the federal agencies in charge of issuing a final decision on the Keystone XL pipeline by an arbitrary timeline. The problem, as I see it, is that the majority is attempting to use an act of Congress to direct the administration to do what is already is in the process of being done. In a media notice dated June 6th, Mr. Chairman, I want to bring your attention to the fact that the State Department issued a statement saying that they expected to make a final decision granting or denying the permit for Keystone XL pipeline, quote, before the end of 2011, end of quote. However, Mr. Chairman, this bill will force the administration to issue the presidential permit for the pipeline within 30 days of the final environmental impact statement and not later than November the 1st, 2011, regardless of whether the review process has been completed or not. This arbitrary timeline will reduce the allotted time that federal agencies will have to determine the national interest in deciding this proposal by almost 2/3, while also reducing or eliminating the 30-day public comment period. Mr. Chairman, I find it difficult to understand why Congress needs to intervene to direct the administration to do what is already in the process of being done anyway. I also find it equally disturbing that this subcommittee will attempt to cut out the time for the various agencies to weigh in and make their national interest determination, or the time for the public to weigh in, simply to instruct the administration to make a decision only 2 months before it is already said that it would do so. The reason why this permitting process has taken the time that it has is because the EPA had serious concerns with the initial environmental impact statement that the State Department issued, and it was sent back to be modified and to be updated. The State Department then decided to allow the public and other decision makers to review the updated information so all of the relevant information could be considered. This bill seeks to force the administration to make a decision regardless of whether or not this information has been reviewed or even appropriately considered. I would submit that despite the potential benefits that this pipeline may or may not ultimately deliver, it is extremely important that all of the relevant information and consequent impacts be considered so that an informed decision can be made. With a project this consequential, Mr. Chairman, short-circuiting the permitting process in order to expedite a decision just a couple of months early would be so short-sighted and so unacceptable to the American people and to the community that this pipeline will ultimately affect if it is to be built. In order to allow the public and the agencies the appropriate time to comment, I would offer an amendment to push back the November 1st deadline while also ensuring that a decision is made on this particular issue in a timely manner. Mr. Chairman, I urge all of my colleagues to support the amendment that I will offer, and with that, I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you, Mr. Rush. At this time, I'll recognize the Chairman of the Energy and Commerce Committee, Mr. Upton, for 5 minutes for the purpose of an opening statement.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm not going to take my full 5 minutes, so I'll yield some of it to the other members. In this committee, we often hear from the other side that the U.S. consumes 25% of the world's oil, but only controls 2% of the world's reserves. In fact, I'm told that the President said that just yesterday. So it certainly makes for a good soundbite, no doubt about it. But what you don't hear from those using that line of rhetoric is the massive resource base held by our friend and ally to the north, Canada. Simply put, Canada's recent oil sands discoveries have the potential to tilt the balance of power through energy security in North America's favor. The high oil and gasoline prices seen recently are due at least in part to threatened, disrupted, and outright restricted oil resources in unstable parts of the world. It seems obvious that one of the main pillars of our nation's economic policy should be to promote trade with stable and friendly nations, especially when it comes to oil. With Canada's oil sands coming online and the enormous untapped resources residing here in the U.S., North America appears to have the capacity to break free from unfriendly sources of oil and bring down gas prices at the pump. But there's only one thing standing in the way, and that's this administration. This is the same administration that asked Brazil and OPEC nations to increase production and promises the U.S. will be a good customer. But when it comes to Canada, a trusted ally and trading partner, the energy partnership is inexplicably delayed. The Obama administration's own Department of Energy says we can unshackle ourselves from nations half a world away with the Keystone pipeline. DOE's analysis of Keystone states in clear, simple English that the project can essentially eliminate our Middle East oil imports. Transporting oil sands crude, which is substantially cheaper than OPEC crude, will in fact lower gas prices. Yes, secure oil supplies, those that are not vulnerable to OPEC supply disruptions, will lower gas prices. On top of the clear gas price and national security benefits, economic studies conclude that the pipeline could actually perhaps more than produce 100,000 jobs. Sadly, necessary permits have been in limbo for nearly 3 years, and the clear implication is that while other agencies have endorsed this job creator, EPA is doing everything that it can to delay the project to death. To end the delays and require this administration to make a timely decision on the pipeline, Mr. Terry of Nebraska has introduced the North American-Made Energy Security Act. This simple bill instructs the President to pull all involved federal agencies together to expedite the already delayed process and come to a decision by November 1st of this year. To those who think the pipeline should not see the light of day because they disapprove of oil sands, crude, you are fooling yourself if you think that oil sands will not continue to be produced in Canada in the absence of this pipeline, perhaps as much as 3 to 4 million barrels a day by the end of the decade. The only difference is where is it going to be refined and consumed? If not here in the United States, it will likely go to China, and maybe they'll export it back. What a deal. With gas prices, high unemployment, and clear threats to national security, a project like Keystone should be a top priority for this administration as well as any other, and I'd like to think that we'll be able to move this bill with a bipartisan vote later in the days ahead. And I yield to the gentleman from Nebraska, Mr. Terry, the sponsor of the bill.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. For those who suggest that we're rushing the process, which is humorous, Keystone Pipeline is the most studied cross-border crude oil pipeline proposal of all projects that the Department of State has considered. Department of State issued a comprehensive, multi-volume draft environmental assessment in April 2010. This April, State Department issued a supplemental draft environmental impact statement for public comment. The supplemental draft environmental impact statement concluded that, quote, the information provided in this SDEIS does not alter the conclusions reached in the draft EIS regarding the need for and the potential impacts of the proposed project. As a policy matter, it is better for the U.S. to get its oil from the North American sources or from countries that are hostile to us. And make no mistake, the U.S. is not the only market for this oil. Oil goes where oil is needed. If we choose to let this opportunity slip by because of delay on the decision, this North American energy supply will go to other countries and be returned to us at a premium. Not only that, we will lose the jobs that could have been created in both construction and refining. We cannot continue to afford this delay. And I yield back.
Thank you. I would like to remind the members that this is a markup, and every member will have an opportunity to make a 2-minute opening statement if they so desire. So at this time, I'd like to recognize the gentleman from California, Mr. Waxman, for a purpose of an opening statement.
Mr. Chairman, today we're marking up H.R. 1938. This legislation directs the President to expedite approval of the proposed Keystone XL pipeline, which would carry a sludge made from Canadian tar sands through the middle of America. This project would raise gas prices, endanger water supplies, and increase carbon emissions. Keystone XL is a highly controversial project. The State Department received nearly 50,000 comments on the drawn environmental impact statement. Once it is built, we will live with the pipeline and its impacts for 50 years or more. This is a decision that we need to make right. Unfortunately, this bill's approach is not to get it right. Instead, it says, whatever the risks and costs, just get it done. H.R. 1938 takes the extraordinary step of interfering in an ongoing decision-making process by the Secretary of State. The Secretary is in the midst of determining whether granting the permit requested by TransCanada would be in the national interest. The process for making these permit decisions was established by the executive orders issued by President Johnson and President George W. Bush. This bill overrides the executive orders and other federal law, and it short-circuits the decision-making process. It requires the President to make a decision by November 1, even if the environmental impact statement has not been finalized, as required under the National Environmental Policy Act. It cuts the time for other agencies to provide their views by 2/3. It reduces or eliminates the opportunity for public comments on the national interest determination. And it essentially determines the outcome. The bill finds that the earliest possible construction of Keystone XL will serve the national interest, making it extremely difficult, if not impossible, for the State Department to decide otherwise. I don't think Keystone XL is in the national interest. My greatest concern is that Keystone makes us more reliant on the dirtiest source of fuel currently available. On a life cycle basis, tar sands emit far more carbon pollution than conventional oil, almost 40% more by some estimates. That's because it takes huge amounts of energy to take something the consistency of tar, which they mine, and turn it into synthetic oil. We should be reducing our oil dependence and using cleaner fuels, but Keystone is a big step in the opposite direction. This project raises many other concerns. Tomorrow, after this subcommittee acts on this bill, we will hear about pipeline safety concerns associated with tar sands pipelines. TransCanada, Keystone XL's owner and operator, has had 12 spills on the first Keystone pipeline, and it has been operating for less than a year. The Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration shut down Keystone 1 earlier this month when it found that continued operation without corrective action would be hazardous to life, property, and the environment. The risks from spills are exacerbated with Keystone XL because it is routed through the Ogallala Aquifer, which spans 8 states and provides drinking water for 2 million people. The shallow water table and highly porous soils means that a spill can spread rapidly. And with all these risks, the benefits are unclear. The study commissioned by DOE found that we will have excess pipeline capacity from Canada for the next decade or more, even without Keystone XL. And Keystone XL will likely raise, not lower, gas prices. In its permit application, TransCanada told the Canadian government that by addressing the oversupply of crude and raising prices, Keystone XL will increase revenue for Canadian producers by $2 to $4 billion a year. I understand why Big Oil wants Keystone XL, and I know why they want to short-circuit the process. The more we learn about this project, the worse it looks. What I don't know is why we should be weighing in on the side of the oil companies when the risks are so high for the American people. Finally, I'd like to note this legislation does not appear to comply with the discretionary cut-go policy that Chairman Upton announced at the beginning of this Congress. H.R. 1938 imposes a new duty on the Secretary of Energy. However, the legislation fails to impose a limit on the amount of appropriations that are authorized for its implementation, and it does not reduce an existing authorization to offset new programs. I urge Chairman Upton to provide clarity on the status of the policies he announced in January. If he does not intend to follow the discretionary cut-go rules, that would be useful for all members to know. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Waxman. It appears that on our side of the aisle we have no one else wanting to make an opening statement. So, Mr. Matheson, would you? Mr. Matheson waives. So, at this point, the chair would call up H.R. 1938 and ask the clerk to report.
H.R. 1938 to direct the President to expedite the consideration
Without objection, the first reading of the bill is dispensed with, and the bill will be open for amendment at any point, so ordered. And in keeping with the chairman's policies, are there any bipartisan amendments? If not, are there any amendments?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk. Amendment number 37.
The clerk would report the amendment, please.
An amendment offered by Mr. Rush of Illinois.
Mr. Rush, you are recognized for 5 minutes to explain your amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment to delete finding number 15 from the bill. Mr. Chairman, in reviewing the findings in this bill, I found that while many of the statements were questionable, there was one that was very misleading, if not altogether inaccurate. Finding number 15 states, and I quote, "Analysis using the Environmental Protection Agency models shows that the Keystone XL pipeline will result in no significant change in total United States or global greenhouse gas emissions," end of quote. Mr. Chairman, my office has been in touch with the EPA, and we were informed that it is very misleading to say that EPA models were used to draw conclusions about the impact of the Keystone XL pipeline on greenhouse gas emissions. In fact, the State Department Environmental Impact Statement, or SDEIS, relies on a 2010 report prepared by Insights Energy Systems Incorporated that was hired by the DOE to run several crude oil transport scenarios using a model developed by INSEAS. To estimate greenhouse gas emissions impacts on the back end of their modeling, INSEAS used life cycle greenhouse gas emission factors developed by EPA as a data input into their calculations. However, the model used by Insights was not developed by EPA, nor has it been used by EPA to analyze the Keystone XL project. Mr. Chairman, the State Department's supplemental draft environmental impact statement on the Keystone XL pipeline specifically confirms that Canadian oil sands crude are greenhouse gas intensive in relation to other types of crude oil due primarily to increased emissions associated with production and refining. So I think that we should be careful, even in the haste of trying to push this bill through, that we do not include misleading statements that attempt to highlight the benefits of building this pipeline without acknowledging any of the potential detriments. In order to correct this misleading statement, I urge all of my colleagues to support my amendment, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Move to strike the last word. In opposition.
The gentleman is recognized for opposition to the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I reach a different conclusion reading through the environmental study than my colleague and friend from Illinois. Let me, he mentioned the NSIS report and also mentioned that they didn't use the EPA modeling, but they did. It says in the report that changes in life cycle greenhouse gas emissions were calculated with the models and methodology used in deriving indirect impacts of petroleum consumption for the Renewable Fuel Standards 2 program, which is the EPA standards. Then based on EPA's modeling, here's the conclusion. The world end DOE Energy Technologies Perspective Model Analysis results show no significant change in U.S. refining activity, total crude and product import volumes, costs in global refining, refinery carbon dioxide and total life cycle greenhouse gas emissions, whether Keystone XL is built or not. And then page after page of the chart showing no significant impacts based on the modeling based upon the EPA's own models. Now, what we're seeing here is in real time, what's occurring is the blocking and doing nothing on energy as our energy security and economy deteriorates. So the EPA, if they're coming up with new standards to try and alter the outcome here, then that's a different story. And I think that's what EPA is trying to do as the rogue organization that they seem to have embraced today. So, Mr. Chairman, I don't see any need for this. It is the exact verbiage out of the environmental study. And by the way, Mr. Chairman, all of these notebooks here is the first environmental study. And another, well, it's only about 2 notebooks, is the supplemental. And they've all come to the same conclusion that there's no impact. And just common sense would tell you globally that if this was shipped to China and refined, it's still going to have the same carbon emissions. And that's the conclusion that was made here. So I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. Mr. Waxman, you're recognized for the purpose of supporting the amendment.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I do seek recognition for that purpose. I think that this amendment is a wise one. It would delete a finding that appears to have no factual basis. Nothing in the record for this decision shows any analysis of greenhouse gas emissions based on an EPA model, nor does the record indicate that under no circumstances would the Keystone XL pipeline result in higher greenhouse gas emissions. In fact, the supplemental draft environmental impact statement recognizes that tar sands crude has substantially higher life cycle greenhouse gas emissions compared to the average U.S. crude supply. The supplemental draft environmental impact statement also includes an analysis commissioned by DOE showing that Keystone XL increases total greenhouse gas emissions compared to the base case under at least one of the scenarios analyzed. If a pipeline to the west coast of Canada is not built and a substantial other cross-border capacity is not built or expanded, Keystone XL would increase total life cycle greenhouse gas emissions. And while Canadian oil producers threaten to send the oil to China if we don't approve the Keystone XL right now, that's not a very plausible scenario. While small expansions of existing capacity may be possible, there are very few significant legal and political hurdles for a major new pipeline running through First Nations land across British Columbia. Deleting this finding won't make this bill sensible, and it won't make it acceptable, but at least it would reflect less poorly upon this committee by deleting a finding that is inadequately supported. And therefore, I urge members to vote for the Rush amendment. I'll give back my time.
Does anyone seek recognition to speak in opposition to the amendment?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Bilbray, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, you know, I'd love to say here we go again, where every time there's a proposal, we look at torpedoing a proposal down the line and then trying to find the negatives for the proposal. But we never give the environmental impact of the no project option equal weight. and it's one of the greatest mistakes we've made in environmental assessment. When you talk about not building a road, everybody's looking at the car emissions of cars on a freeway, but they don't look at the fact that if you don't build a road and the congestion goes in there, how much more emissions will be caused by not putting in the capital improvements. And frankly, I just really look at this proposal as a classic example. How can we overlook the fact that the alternative to this project is to continue to import oil into the United States with tankers, which happens to constitute one of the largest threats to our beaches, not offshore oil, but imported oil that's coming from overseas, has been shipped, thousands of miles by tanker, exposed to not only traditional risk or environmental hazards of nature, but also man-made threats that are growing all along. And to now try to focus on one aspect that may be a concern and totally ignore the historical problems of the alternative, and that is shipping it on tankers in the ocean over environmental sensitive areas where we have no control over at all. And then to ignore that and do it in a manner that you claim to be environmentally sensitive, I think doesn't reflect reality when it comes down to addressing the issues. And so I understand the traditional approach at looking at this. Look at the impact of the project, but ignore the no project impact. I think it's time that those of us who really want to care about the environment and care about environmental independence and economic and energy independence have to be brave enough to be a little more sophisticated than we've historically done when we've done these assessments. And I think the no project option, as opposed to what is being proposed here, is a hell lot worse to the environment and to the economy and to energy independence than moving forward with this. And so I will yield back at this time.
Here, would you yield to me?
I yield to the gentleman from.
I just want to add one other point or layer, and that is on those ships is going to be heavy crude from Venezuela or some other place. And so you're still refining once it gets here the same level or similar level of a heavy crude.
Well, and reclaiming my time, anyone who spent any time flying over Houston can see the tankers lined up offshore in the Gulf of Mexico waiting to come in. And the fact is this thing works both ways. And so there is a risk there. I just don't think that, if you really care about the environment and energy independence, you've got to look at the big picture. And that's what I think that this motion ignores, and that's why I sadly have to oppose it this time. I yield back.
Mr. Chairman.
For what purpose is this gentleman?
I'm going to say your last word. Sorry. Move to strike the last word.
The gentleman's recognized.
Mr. Chairman, this seems to me is the proverbial jumping to conclusions kind of scenario. I mean, it seems as though my friends on the other side of the aisle, and they are my friends, they seem to feel as though we are opposed to the pipeline, or that the State Department or the Obama administration is opposed to the pipeline. I think that that's jumping to a conclusion prematurely. However, Mr. Chairman, we're suggesting that there is a falsehood that really kind of stands up and stands out in their determination in the matter before us, and that is that the EPA itself said that they did not use our model. Now, if the EPA disowns that statement and in the bill, then I think that it's responsible for members of this committee to accept the fact that EPA said that this is misleading, that this is not the model that they use, and that the proponents of this bill is actually perpetuating a fraud on the American people by suggesting that they did, that this is an EPA model, and they did use a model that was verified by the EPA. Mr. Chairman, I also want to say that, 2 months, 60 days, that's all my amendment says, 60 days. Give the EPA and the administration 60 days. And if they don't do it in 60 days, then we're all in agreement. We'll direct the EPA to enter into negotiations, but allow them 60 more days. They've already indicated that they will, by the end of this year, reach a decision. Now, November or January, I mean, does it really make a difference? Does it really make a difference? So why can't we just accept this amendment and move forward on this, Mr. Chair? We don't have to spend all this time. It's a sensible amendment.
Mr. Rush, I would like to try to clarify one thing. I thought we were discussing the amendment to strike some findings that were in the legislation. I thought we were discussing an amendment to strike findings in the legislation. We're not taking up the amendment to extend the deadline at this point, are we?
Well, you're absolutely correct, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Okay. Well, does anyone else seek recognition to speak for or against the amendment? If there is no further discussion, the vote occurs on the amendment. All those in favor of the amendment say aye. Aye. All those opposed, no. No. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it. Chairman? Yes. For what purpose does the gentleman seek recognition?
I have an amendment at the desk, number
Clerk will
003.
report the amendment, please.
An amendment offered by Mr. Waxman of California.
Without objection, the reading of the amendment is dispensed with, and the gentleman from California is recognized for 5 minutes in support of his amendment.
This bill makes a series of findings related to the Keystone XL pipeline. Some of these findings are a matter of opinion. One finding says that the earliest possible construction of Keystone XL will serve the national interest. That's what the Secretary of State is supposed to determine with input from the public, states, tribes, and other federal agencies. 48,490 commenters weighed in on just the environmental impact statement, but even before they held a single hearing, the Republicans on this committee were sure they knew the answer. Some of these findings appear to be just wrong. Number 15 says that analysis using EPA models shows that Keystone XL will result in no significant change in total U.S. or global greenhouse gas emissions. There's no such reference in the decision-making record to analysis using EPA models. But all of these findings share one characteristic. They all support the pipeline, and inconvenient facts are not included. I happen to think that the potential impact on gas prices is a critically important fact. As the State Department decides whether this project is in the national interest, I think most Americans would think that impacts on gas prices is a relevant consideration. So my amendment is very simple. It adds a finding that simply states what TransCanada, the company proposing to build the Keystone XL pipeline, told the Canadian government about how the pipeline would affect oil prices in the Midwest. Specifically, TransCanada reported what would happen to oil prices in Illinois, Indiana, Iowa, Kansas, Kentucky, Michigan, Minnesota, Missouri, Nebraska, North Dakota, Ohio, Oklahoma, South Dakota, Tennessee, and Wisconsin. TransCanada said that Keystone XL will increase oil prices in these states, increasing annual revenue to Canadian oil producers by an estimated $2 to $4 billion. And at the hearing last month with TransCanada, no one disputed this. I know some of my colleagues will argue that increasing the price of crude oil won't affect gasoline prices, but at least one prominent oil market economist says Keystone XL will increase gas prices. And when asked whether he would assure us that the Midwest gas prices wouldn't go up with Keystone XL, the TransCanada representative at the hearing couldn't do that. In fact, the TransCanada representative said that Americans in the Midwest are currently getting discounted oil. The people in the Midwest are known for being nice, but I suspect that if you stop at any gas station in the Midwest and tell someone filling up their tank that they're getting discounted oil, you'll get an earful. I think the State Department should get a better understanding of this issue at a minimum. I hope my colleagues will support this simple, fact-based, highly relevant amendment. And yield back my time.
Okay.
Gentlemen seek recognition.
Speak against the amendment, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman's recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As a Midwesterner, some of these debates, they really don't make a lot of sense. If you're bringing more supply, if you believe in Economics 101, more supply in a more secure transportation route, as Mr. Bilbray said, pipelines versus tankers from places that we're going to war with, more secure, more supply, Economics 101 would say prices would go down. But if my friend wants to cite the Keystone data, why doesn't he also cite, for Illinois, the data provided them about the increase in industry output per year if this pipeline goes through, which is 2.769 million. Why doesn't he cite the increase in GDP for the state of Illinois, which is 1.445 million? Why doesn't he cite the increase in jobs for the state of Illinois, which is 14,600 jobs would be created? Or the jobs created from 2009 to 2025, which would be 26,500. Why doesn't he cite the number of suppliers from the state of Illinois, which would be higher to help build the pipeline, which for the state of Illinois is 69? This is a project whose time has come. It's already been delayed 12 months more than any pipeline built across an international boundary. This thing has to move. That's why we need no longer any delay, and I'd like to yield my time to Mr. Terry.
Thank you, Mr. Shimkus. And recalling the testimony, the gentleman from TransCanada did not provide an opinion there because that wasn't his area of expertise. But there were several others on that panel, if we remember correctly, who did refute that statement, saying that on a heavy crude that does sell at a lower price than sweet crude, that the world market for that level of or heaviness of crude would dictate it, that the transportation costs being lower would keep the prices down, and then economic supply of law and demand, if we're receiving 700,000 barrels per day of a resource that could be refined, would further reduce prices, was the testimony from the expert economists, energy experts that day. So the reality is the testimony as a whole obtained that day said that this would actually lower prices at the retail pump for consumers. So that's whatever the person in TransCanada said on the record has been definitely refuted at the retail gas stations in the United States would actually be decreased. So I think the finding is completely representative of the testimony that was obtained and not refuted. So to delete that and put in the one statement from a TransCanada official, probably out of context, would be the one that would be more misleading. So I would recommend a no vote on this amendment.
Mr. Chairman.
The gentleman yield. The time is still mine. I would just end by.
Would the gentleman yield?
I will. If,
you made some pretty glowing remarks in your data concerning the state of Illinois, and as a fellow in Illinois, and you and I are very close friends, but I just want to know what was your source for that data? Is it TransCanada or is it an Illinois company?
The source is the Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers survey members partial listing as of January 2011.
That's what I figured. I figured it was from Canada.
Well, I'm reclaiming my time. As you know, Caterpillar is one of our largest companies in the state of Illinois. And guess who will be using the heavy equipment and what equipment they'll be using? They'll be using Caterpillar equipment. So this is a great benefit for the state of Illinois, and that's why I'm very supportive. I have only 15 seconds remaining. I yield back my time.
Gentleman yields back the balance of his time. Who seeks recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I seek recognition.
The gentleman from Illinois seeks recognition to speak in favor of the amendment.
Mr. Chairman, I yield as much time as you want to consume to the ranking member of the full committee.
Thank you for yielding to me. In the Midwest, which is the only place these tar sand oil can go at the present time, there's an oversupply. And the people in Canada are looking at that and saying, well, if there's more supply, that means they can't get the highest price. So they're looking forward to shipping this down the pipeline to Louisiana, which will mean they don't have to put as much in the Midwest. And if they send it to Louisiana, that will increase the prices of it after they're refined, because there's not an oversupply in Louisiana and other places where that oil will go. So the Midwest is not immune from the basic economics of supply and demand. That's why the Canadian oil companies have said that they stand to make more money, because they can then start charging more in the Midwest. There won't be an oversupply any longer in the Midwest. If there's not an oversupply in the Midwest, they can charge more for the oil in the Midwest. Now, I think it's just the reality that sometimes our constituents don't know when their representatives act in a way that causes prices to go up. But I would submit that passing this legislation and allowing this pipeline not to bypass the Midwest, to take that oil right down to the refineries in Louisiana, will end up in a disadvantage for the Midwest, and I think that ought to be one of our findings.
Would the gentleman yield on that point?
I'll yield, but not right now. Mr. Chairman, this is I support the Waxman amendment. This is a simple statement of fact. TransCanada told the Canadian government that Keystone XL will increase revenues for tar sand producers by $2 to $4 billion a year by raising crude oil prices in the Midwest. That's what they told them, by raising crude oil prices in the Midwest. And Mr. Chairman, why would we be surprised? The oil industry isn't making a $77 billion investment out of the goodness of their hearts. The pipeline is going to make them a lot of money. And if they make that money by raising gas prices, then that should be our most serious and most real concern. So this is clearly relevant to the national interest determination. It's also factually unassailable. Whether or not you agree with them, TransCanada's statement is in their permit application. Dr. Philip Verlager is a prominent oil market economist who served in the Ford and Carter administration, taught at Yale University, worked at a major investment firm, and now owns his own consulting firm and teaches at the University of Calgary. Here's what Dr. Verlager had to say about Keystone, and I quote, U.S. consumers should not have to pay a $5 billion duty to Canadian oil companies for an insurance policy of little value, and I end quote. He further states that Keystone will allow, and I quote him again, a deliberate manipulation of the U.S. oil market that will raise gas prices for Midwest farmers and consumers even higher, end of quote. I urge all the members of this committee to support the Waxman Amendment, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Mr. Chairman.
The chair recognizes himself for the purpose of speaking in opposition to the amendment. I would point out that the West Texas Intermediate crude is predominantly used in that area, and there has been a lack of supply in that area because of the demand, and because of that, it's necessary to go to the world marketplace to buy additional oil, which is even higher. And it makes sense to me that if you build a pipeline and you bring in an additional supply of oil from Canada, that's going to supplement the WTI oil that is there, and it's going to reduce the necessity to buy oil on the foreign market place. So I think there's every reason to believe that this additional supply is actually going to reduce the price of gasoline, and I would like to yield time to the gentleman from Texas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I feel like I've walked into Alice in Wonderland. You know, I missed the opening statements, and I walk in, and my good friend, Mr. Waxman, and my good friend, Mr. Rush, are saying bringing more oil to the U.S. market is going to raise prices. And they point to some studies and stuff. Well, let's just do oil 101 real quick. WTI stands for West Texas Intermediate. West Texas Intermediate is a type of oil that is in high demand because it has low sulfur content and it has viscosity that allows it to be easily refined to maximize gasoline production, which is the highest quality byproduct that comes from oil. Texas has been producing some different types of West Texas Intermediate since the 1920s. Right now, we're producing about 1 million barrels a day. Not all of it is West Texas Intermediate. The oil that's going to come in from Canada is a different type of oil. It sells at a discount because, first of all, it has to be removed from the tar sands, and it's a heavier oil. Okay, the pipeline is going to bring it into the Midwest. And it is true that if the Midwest buys that oil, that there is going to be revenue additionally generated for the Canadian producers. If that weren't the case, they wouldn't send it down the pipeline. But that doesn't mean automatically that the price is going to be higher to the consumers. The consumers in the Midwest are going to have two choices. The refiners that use the oil. They can use West Texas Intermediate from Texas and Oklahoma. They can use this Canadian oil that's coming down through the pipeline. They're going to choose the best price. They're going to choose the best deal. But oil generically is fungible. The oil that they don't use is going to go somewhere else. And it's overall, by bringing more oil into the United States market, it's going to lower the price unless the demand for oil worldwide goes up. If there's another crisis in the Middle East, if there's some sort of another explosion somewhere that reduces overall demand on the world market, then the price overall will go up. But if that doesn't happen, if all things are equal and you have normal business conditions, bringing more oil from Canada through this pipeline, competing with oil coming up from Texas and Oklahoma, is going to make a better deal for the Midwest, more choice, and lower price. Lower price. This amendment is an Alice in Wonderland amendment and should be rejected emphatically, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Gentleman, yield.
I'll be happy to yield.
And I would just add that right outside my district is a ConocoPhillips refinery, and it's refining both light and heavy. It's just about finishing its $2 billion expansion. It's had thousands of members of organized labor building the expansion of the ConocoPhillips refinery for years. Even in this downturn, I've talked about it for years now because we're so proud of the fact, $2 billion to refine this heavy crude. And so in this economic downturn, members of organized labor, iron workers, operating engineers, laborers have been highly employed in this expansion. And this refinery is going to be able to refine both types, which will bring both types of part of the process will be of gasoline to the market. So it's all about jobs, and this is a jobs bill.
And if the chairman would yield back to me the remaining 15 seconds. If this amendment is correct, the way to lower oil prices for America is not let any oil come in from overseas. Not let any oil from anywhere come in, and we'll get gasoline back to 25 cents a gallon. if this amendment is correct.
My time has expired. If there's no further discussion, the vote would occur on the amendment. All those in favor shall signify by saying aye. All those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it. Are there additional amendments? Clerk will report the gentleman's amendment.
An amendment offered by Mr. Rush of Illinois.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes to explain his amendment.
Mr. Chairman, this is my final amendment for the day, and I just know this amendment is going to pass unanimously. So I'm in a bipartisan way, I'm convinced of this. My amendment would allow for 120 days after the final environmental impact, or no later than January 1, 2012, for the President to issue a decision on the Keystone XL pipeline. Mr. Chairman, as written, this bill would force the administration to issue the presidential permit for the pipeline within 30 days of the final impact statement and no later than November 1, 2011. This arbitrary timeline will reduce the allotted time that federal agencies would have to determine the national interest in deciding this proposal by almost 2/3, while also reducing or eliminating the 30-day public comment period. I believe public input is a vital and necessary part of the deliberation process, especially for the local communities that would be most affected by a decision to move forward. I also believe it is important for the various departments to weigh in with their national interest determinations, which this bill would severely curtail, if not completely eliminate. In fact, in conversations that my office has held with the State Department, as well as the EPA, we were informed that it would be close to impossible for the responsible agencies to do their due diligence and report to the arbitrary timeline of November the 1st as this bill would mandate. Additionally, as I stated in my opening, the State Department has already publicly stated, Mr. Chairman, that it expects to have a decision on Keystone out by the end of this year. Mr. Chairman, my amendment will allow for the appropriate time period for the public and the different agencies to weigh in, while also mandating that a decision is made within a timely manner. Pushing the deadline back by just 2 months will avoid short-circuiting the review process and also make sure that a decision is made in a reasonable time period. And Mr. Chairman, I would further add that will make this committee look to the American people like it is a committee of determination and not just a committee of expediency. So I urge all of my colleagues to support this amendment, and with that, I yield back the balance of my time. I will yield to the ranking member of the full committee.
I thank you for yielding to me. I support your amendment. I believe the State Department should take the time it needs to get this decision right. At a minimum, this project locks us into decades of highly polluting fuel. At worst, it could also contaminate a critical source of water that supplies drinking water for 2 million people, plus water for ranching and farming across 8 states. So I don't think it makes sense to set any artificial deadline for this permit decision. That said, this amendment certainly improves the bill. The State Department has said that they plan to issue a decision by the end of this year, and they appear to be on track to do so. The permit applicant has said that they need a decision by the end of the year. The timing contemplated by this amendment is consistent with timing that both the State Department and the permit applicant have indicated is acceptable. In contrast, the underlying bill short-circuits the process, cuts out most of the time provided for other agencies to weigh in, and under the executive order, and largely eliminates any opportunity for public comment on the national interest determination. The November 1, 2011 deadline in the bill is unnecessary, is likely to drive a decision based on inadequate analysis, and stakeholder input. While this amendment wouldn't fix the bill, it reduces some of the concerns, and I would urge my colleagues to support this amendment. I thank you for yielding to me.
Mr. Chairman.
The gentleman from Louisiana, Mr. Scalise, is recognized to speak in opposition to the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move to strike the last word. I object to the amendment, and frankly, why would we want to delay any longer on reducing our dependence on Middle Eastern oil? This project has gone on. The analysis has been done. It's been going on for over 3 years. In fact, the report and the ability to get this issued is over a year past due already. So delaying it even further just makes it that much harder for us to get more oil from a friendly partner like Canada and stop importing oil from unfriendly nations in the Middle East. When you look at this decision, the transatlantic pipeline folks have said they need a decision by the end of this year because they're getting offers from other people. China would like this. Other countries would like this oil from these oil sands. And if America says we don't want it from Canada, then Canada's going to go somewhere else, and then we're going to be stuck continuing to have an increased dependence on Middle Eastern oil. And what does that mean? First of all, the pipeline means 20,000 real jobs in America. Those aren't Canadian jobs. Those are 20,000 American jobs to build the pipeline. That's just to build the pipeline. Over $5 billion of property taxes that would be paid in America every year. And then if you look at some of the studies that have been done, there's a net economic benefit from improved efficiencies in America by bringing in this oil from Canada instead of the Middle East of over $100 to $600 billion annually. So why would we want to keep delaying bringing in and creating new American jobs, bringing in oil from Canada instead of the Middle East, when we can actually get this done? They're saying they want to partner with us. Canada's a good partner with America. In fact, if you look at the trade relationship with Canada, for every dollar we trade with Canada, for every dollar we send, we get over 91 cents back. Now, if you compare that to these Middle Eastern countries who we're bringing in over 1 million barrels a day from, when we send $1 over to the Middle Eastern countries, less than 50 cents comes back to America, and the money they keep, in many of the cases, they use against us. So we've got an opportunity to say 700,000 barrels a day can be brought in from Canada, a trading partner where we get over 90 cents back from that dollar in trade, instead of and replacing all this Middle Eastern oil that we're getting. And look, the president goes to Brazil. The president asks OPEC to increase production. He wants to get it from them instead of Canada, from a good trading partner. He doesn't want to get it from America, where we've got known reserves here, where we can create great jobs in America. So what we're saying is let's go get it from Canada. They've got the oil. They want to send it to us and create good jobs here, 20,000 jobs, have a good partner in relationship. And instead, while the president's asking OPEC to do more, OPEC said they're not going to increase production because they want the cost to go up. Now, you wonder why. They're talking about the price of oil. This is a supply and demand issue. Why do you think it is that oil prices have nearly doubled since the president's been in office? And it's going to continue going up because the president's policy is shut off supplies from our friends, shut off supplies in America, and make us more reliant on Middle Eastern oil. Just look at the numbers. If we do business with Canada, if we don't delay anymore, and believe me, we've been delaying for 3 years, this has been going on. It's over a year past due already. EPA would love to have more ability to drag this out even further. And then guess what? We're more dependent on Middle Eastern oil because Canada will say, you know what? Y'all don't want our oil. Other people do. We'll go trade with somebody who wants it. And instead, we've got the ability to create 20,000 jobs just on the construction. Billions of dollars coming into our economy every single year. And we'll be trading with a country who we've got a great relationship with, where 90 cents of every dollar we trade comes back to us. And by the way, we're replacing over 700,000 barrels a day that we're right now buying from Middle Eastern countries, where less than half the money comes back to us, and the money they keep, in many cases, they use against us. This is a no-brainer. We've been delaying way too long already. Why would we want to drag this out any longer? Why would we want to run even more jobs out of America to some of these foreign countries who don't like us? Let's get this done. They've been dragging it out for long enough. It makes perfect sense. It would create great jobs, and it reduces our dependence on Middle Eastern oil. So I oppose the amendment, and I'll yield back the balance of my time.
Mr. Chairman, I move to strike the last word.
The gentleman is recognized to speak in favor.
Mr. Chairman, I hear my colleagues, and I do want all to know that I am, as a representative of a district with excessively high unemployment. I mean, we're far past a recession level in my district. We've been in a perpetual depression state for for a long time now. So I am for jobs. But, Mr. Chairman, I don't think that we need to move hastily. I want to just read you some quotes from a letter that the senator from Nebraska, Senator Johans, wrote to the Secretary of State. And I want to quote a letter dated October 14, 2010. And he says, and I quote, "Dear Secretary Clinton, I write concerning the Keystone XL pipeline under consideration by the Department of State. As you may know, I have repeatedly expressed concern that regulatory action related to this permit application be executed such that maximum care is taken to safeguard the Ogallala aquifer, an irreplaceable natural resource in the state of Nebraska. As noted in the draft environmental impact statement released on April 16th of this year, the aquifer supplies 78% of public water supply and 80% of irrigation water in Nebraska. I'm sorry. The document further acknowledges that crude oil could migrate into subsurface aquifers and into areas where these aquifers are used for water supplies. As a senator, it is my duty to review federal actions that might impact resources critical to the State Department. He goes on in a letter dated August 11, 2010, stating basically the same things. As you may know, he writes this to the president of TransCanada Corporation, and this is from Senator Johans again. He says, "Mr. Gerling, I write concerning the Keystone XL project under consideration by the Department of State. As you may know, I have repeatedly expressed concern that the maximum care be granted to safeguard the Ogallala aquifer, an irreplaceable natural resource in the state of Nebraska. In addition, I have posed questions to both TransCanada and federal agencies involved in the permitting process and look forward to receiving the answers. Today, however, I write with a separate but equal serious concern related to ongoing negotiations between Nebraska landowners and TransCanada and the threatened use of eminent domain. I have had multiple conversations with Nebraskans who have indicated that TransCanada representatives have established hard deadlines for landowner responses to offers for easement payments within as little as 2 weeks, I am told. Such deadlines may be normal course of business for negotiation between private parties. However, Nebraska landowners are being told in addition that the use of eminent domain authority will be triggered. Here are two issues, Mr. Chairman, two issues that are relevant to my amendment. All right, and the senator from Nebraska is asking, and the Secretary of State to be deliberate in her in this process, to take the time necessary, and I think that he is absolutely on point, and I think this subcommittee will be on point if, in fact, we would extend this deadline and adopt this my amendment. Thank you. Now yield back.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Terry is recognized for 5 minutes to speak in opposition to the amendment.
Thank you. A couple of points. First, many of the concerns that were in Senator Johans' letter, we all are concerned in the state of Nebraska. And I have said, and Senator Johans has said, that we're going to rely on the science and the environmental impact studies that have shown already that the Ogallala Aquifer and the surface, the environmental surface in the sandhills can be protected. So I'm going to go with the science. And by the way, again, these 7 folders here is the environmental impact study in the supplemental. This has been studied and studied very thoroughly. There's been no accusations other than the EPA's in their attempt to delay this even further, that this has been wrong or inadequate. Now, the other part, and Mr. Rush would not know this, but Mr. Johans, the senator, and I have been working on this legislation, and he doesn't disagree. The fallacy here is that somehow this is being rushed. And I find that as I peek over the environmental impact study here, very interesting since the permit or the request was initially filed in September of 2008. Generally, pipelines like this will take about 18 months to work through the process to get their approval, maybe 20 months, maybe on the outside 24. But here we're going on the 3rd year. There's been 20 public hearings across the nation, up and down the pipeline, in February of 2009. The last comment I'll make here is that what we're saying is we want a quicker, or we want them to really just get off their rear and start doing it. This is June 15th. If they want another series, State Department wants another series of hearings, let them start it. Let them go out there. The paperwork's all there in front of them to get the additional comments if they want a second round. Start them. That's all what we're saying here. November isn't 30 days away. November is 5 months away. So start on it now. If we pass this, they'll understand that if they want to go through additional processes, they can start them now. And that's all we're saying here. So at this point in time, I see no reason to do anything but oppose this amendment. Now, I'll yield back my time. And
if there's no further discussion, then the vote occurs on the amendment. All those in favor shall signify by saying aye. All those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chairs and those have it, the amendment is not agreed to. The vote will now occur on reporting H.R. 1938, the North American Made Energy Security Act, out of the subcommittee. That's it. All those in favor of reporting the bill out signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and H.R. 1938 is reported out of the subcommittee.